Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar for Community Project Funding Grantees. I'm Randall Mullen with TDA Consulting, and I will further introduce myself and the co-presenter momentarily.
Randall, you're on mute.
Okay, we'll get started now, everyone. Hello and welcome to this webinar for Community Project Funding Grantees. I'm Randall Mullen with TDA Consulting. I will further introduce myself and the co-presenter momentarily. Before we begin presenting the content, I will first cover a few logistics. If you participated in prior CPF cohort webinars, you'll probably know this detail. All participants will be muted during the webinar, so you'll be able to participate in low listen mode. As is customary, the PowerPoint presentation will be available on the HUD Exchange soon after the webinar, and you will find the slides on the recently launched CPF cohort landing page shown here. We urge you to visit that landing page and join the CPF mailing list. This will enable you to receive notifications and obtain grant support. You may simply click on the box in the lower left side of this screenshot, and that will enable you to receive such information. Although you will participate in listen mode, we still want for you to actively engage. You may submit content in the chat feature of Zoom, sending questions to everyone. The co-presenter and I will monitor the chat and answer clarifying questions when possible as they are asked during the presentation. As in the prior webinars, we have reserved time for Q&A toward the end. We'll also invite HUD representatives to answer the more difficult questions and clarify any answers that the presenters offer as necessary. Okay, here's the agenda that will follow today. As I mentioned, it will begin with introductions, followed by an overview of the cohort, a general description of the project narrative section, and then cover its format as well as discuss specific content, project descriptions, metrics, timeline and status, and proposed subrecipients. After we cover those key content areas, we'll also do an activity followed by Q&A, where we'll orally address questions that have not been previously answered, as I mentioned earlier. Lastly, we'll provide you with a homework assignment. I'll begin the introductions and then tag my co-presenter, who will introduce himself and in turn tag the two HUD representatives who are joining us today. Again, my name is Randall Mullen. I'm with TDA Consulting, where I've worked for many years as both vice president and as a senior consultant on a wide range of housing and community development projects. I've recently assisted HUD in explaining guidance around special congressional appropriations. That work has included both recovery from natural disasters and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as its associated economic impacts, and now the CPF program. The co-presenter today is Chad Carson. Chad, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Randall. I'm Chad Carson. I'm with Civics and have been working in the community development, housing, and federal funding world for about a decade now, with the state of Louisiana and in the nonprofit sector, and hoping to share some information today that'll help you get to an executed grant agreement. Looking forward to working with you.
Okay, and Connor, do you want to introduce yourself and your colleague?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Connor LaRoe. I am a program analyst with HUD, stationed with the Congressional Grants Division here at HUD, working to help provide TA efforts like this to help all of our grantees submit all their documents and get to an executed grant agreement. I also wanted to introduce Tracy Rowe if she's here. Tracy, if you're here, feel free to just introduce yourself. And then after that, if anyone else from HUD is on this call, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself if you'd like.
Hello, thank you, Connor. My name is Tracy Rowe, and I am also with HUD with the Congressional Grants Division. I am the grant officer for Connecticut, New Hampshire, as well as Rhode Island.
Okay, we're glad to have both Connor and you, Tracy, along with us.
Hi everyone. My name is Chantel James. I'm the Deputy Director of the Congressional Grants Division. Just want to welcome you and say thank you so much for joining. We're really excited to be able to offer this resource. We've been building our capacity, and we're really happy that we've gotten to this point where we can bring TDA in to assist us. And we hope that you find this resource in the cohorts very valuable in putting together your grant application. Thank you.
And thank you, Chantal. Okay, this CPF cohort is assembled for us to provide you with specific guidance that will assist you with satisfactory completion of all necessary grant materials. You are invited to join this cohort based on your award of a CPF grant. Session 1 today will specifically assist you with completion of the required information that leads to executing your grant agreement, and then turn attention to initiating your special project. Your cohort will learn about the project narrative. And then you will attend 3 additional sessions shown here, one on the budget, the third on the environmental review, and the last on necessary forms which your community must complete as part of the HUD required grant materials. To facilitate and support this cohort, you're enrolled in a learning management system called Absorb, which is hosted by TDA Consulting. This system will eventually extend beyond the delivery of the presentation and the 4 sessions. The LMS feature will provide useful resources as well as serve as a platform for office hours appointments that will be offered to grantees. We'll now turn our attention to the key narrative content areas I previewed earlier. I'll briefly address the project description, and Chad will cover the other areas. If you're just starting to complete the grant materials, or you've been working on them for a while, you probably realize there's no prescribed format for the project narrative. It's understandable. You might get stuck along the way. All the required content will cover several typewritten pages. However, HUD recognizes that you'll begin with essentially a blank page, and that itself can be a challenge for either starting or completing the necessary project description. Our best advice is to refer, of course, to the CPF instructions included in the CPF grant guide. They detail the required content. You may also refer to the standard form used for federal grant applications, that is the SF424, and you may use this presentation as an outline for your draft narrative. The graphic appearing on this slide, as well as the presentation Chad and I are delivering, follows an outline structure that you may adapt for your project narrative. Again, it is not a prescribed format, but you'll find it useful, particularly if you haven't started yet. Those who've already begun probably recognize that the outline closely aligns with the CPF grant guide. Okay, we'll now discuss the detailed content of the project description, beginning with the narrative, including name, address, purpose, and details that provide for a full narrative. A satisfactory project description begins with the seemingly simple task of identifying your community's project name. The project name and other descriptive information must encompass the full scope of the project, and it must cover that project in its entirety. This is essential for HUD to review your grant package and the related materials. You will need information to inform the level of environmental review necessary to gain clearance for your project. And that information must tie back and match the Joint Explanatory Statement, the JES, of the congressional appropriation, unless it's corrected or amended. I'll elaborate on that last point momentarily, but I do want to note that on this slide, you'll find a link to the CPF laws and regulations that include the JES related to your grant award. Because there are literally thousands of these community project funding grants since Congress resumed appropriating funds for such uses, the description must also precisely identify the project location. You may provide an address if it's available. Otherwise, GPS coordinates are acceptable. You'll see in this example that we've planted a stake in the center of Washington, D.C., using its coordinates that may be recognized by the HUD representatives with us today. You'll see in this example that we have also offered the option of including a map. You're encouraged to include a map that depicts the project site in your community. The narrative must also clearly describe your project purpose. This may be as simple as a one-sentence summary describing what the project seeks to accomplish. However, in all cases, you probably must use language that covers a project scope that is quite broad and must appear in the congressional record as part of the JES. You want to make certain that the language you use in describing your project funding identifies that same language. For example, if the JES describes construction of Gateway Plaza in your community, the narrative should also describe a proposed appropriation of funds for construction of Gateway Plaza. HUD has provided these examples of acceptable purpose statements appearing in the grant packages. First, the Community Foundation of Indiana will construct 12,000 square feet of a community center in Peoria, Illinois. The City of Omaha will launch a Main Street revitalization program renovating the facades of historic storefronts on East Main Street. And the town of Gatlinburg will create an updated stormwater management plan. The full narrative then may summarize the entire project, restating its purpose, and most importantly, identifying categories and specific uses of grant funds. Examples on this slide will illustrate that point, but first I want to emphasize that you must describe all actions that will be undertaken as part of the project, regardless of its funding source. HUD recognizes that many projects will benefit from other sources of funding which contribute to the full scope and impact of your project. As such, this content area comprises the bulk of your narrative. Now, what are these examples? Affordable rental housing, capacity building, clearance and demolition, and so forth. They're common activity categories for a wide range of housing and community development projects. Use such activity categories as they will be helpful in the setup of your project within HUD's DRGR Management Information System once your grant agreement is signed and can then be spent. When you have finished drafting the project narrative, we advise you to sit back and ask yourself these three questions, which cover topics of potentially significant content. 1, did you describe the congressional award language? 2, what pre-award costs, if any, are you seeking to reimburse under your grant agreement? And 3, was a federal environmental review completed prior to starting? Lastly, I want to point out before I turn this presentation to Chad to cover project metrics, a point about technical corrections. As this slide states, as the previous slide stated, it's important that your description tie back to the joint explanatory statement contained in the congressional record. Some projects will require a technical correction because there might have been an error or the project changed substantially since announcement. If a technical correction has been made, describe that change in such detail as necessary, but most importantly, discuss it with your grantee, project grant officer, to determine the potential need for the technical correction and how that would be carried out. Going back to this preceding slide, you want that description of scope to tie directly to the congressional language. And as stipulated in this example, if the JES describes construction of Gateway Plaza, then your narrative should also describe the proposed construction of Gateway Plaza. If it does not, we strongly urge you to discuss this difference with your grant officer to determine the need for a technical correction. Okay, I will now turn the presentation over to Chad, who will cover the project matrix. Chad, are you ready to cover the metrics?
I am. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. So I'm going to be covering the project metrics that you'll need to incorporate into your narrative that you'll be submitting to HUD. All projects have to have clearly stated goals and outcomes. Much like the narrative section overall, there's not a prescribed way to do this. So think of things that are countable. For example, you can hold 6 community meetings to gather feedback on a city plan. You could construct 10 miles of walking path or train 60 small business owners. Really, anything that illustrates what you're attempting to achieve and can be quantified could be a potential metric to use. Really, you know your projects best, so you'll be best equipped to come up with how to measure your success. Also, Section 3 is a necessary part of the CPF grants. All CPF grantees must comply with Section 3, which is a provision of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968. For those of you who are not familiar with Section 3, it covers grants involving housing rehab, housing construction, and other public construction projects. There's a link at the bottom of this slide that has guidance on how you'll need to report those hours into the DRGR database. And here we're just giving you a little snippet of what will be required as performance measures for Section 3. You'll need total labor hours, Section 3 labor hours, and then the subset of targeted Section 3 labor hours. You don't have to put those targets into your narrative, but if Section 3 applies to your program, it should be mentioned in your narrative that you have a plan to comply and track. On a related regulatory issue, the Build America, Buy America Act also may apply to you. BABA, as it's called for short, requires that all iron, steel, and manufactured products used for federally funded infrastructure projects are produced in the USA unless there's an approved waiver. But I have some good news for you that HUD has a general waiver for fiscal year 2023 grantees from BABA requirements. So for most of you, BABA won't apply. But grantees that are going to use additional federal funding sources or anticipate 2024 funding or beyond need to comply with BABA. HUD has put together a quick guide for BABA compliance. It's linked at the bottom of this slide here, and it's specific for CPF grantees. It's super helpful. If you're someone that this will apply to, that's your source for information. On the right here, we've got some examples of what are considered covered infrastructure projects according to BABA. But we've got this general waiver unless you anticipate receiving more funding. Timelines. So you need to incorporate a timeline into your narrative. You need to first explain where your project currently stands. The current status of your project is one of the most critical things for your grant officer to understand so that they can give you good advice on how to stay in compliance and get your project to a executed grant agreement and to completion. So make sure in your narrative you have a succinct explanation of where in the project's lifespan it is. And with all these different grantees in the line, I'm sure we have folks with projects in all of the statuses that could be simply in the ideas phase at the very beginning, where no contracts or procurements have happened yet. Or maybe you are in the middle of doing a procurement. Some projects are farther underway. Some programs may be running, or construction projects might be under construction. Perhaps your project's complete. If that's the case, make sure you tell your grant officer. So both inform your grant officer and make sure that this is incorporated into your narrative section. Explain what's going on with your project as of now. You'll also want to incorporate start and completion dates into your narrative. We know, the folks at HUD know, that at this stage in a project, the dates are best estimates. So do what you can, but we will need to have an estimated start date and estimated completion date into the narrative, or you'll have to revise it. So easy thing to make sure you have. Related to your project's current status is its environmental status. Projects in this program have to adhere to the environmental review requirements in NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And you should incorporate into your narrative and explain to your grant officer what steps, if any, have been taken towards environmental clearance on your project. We know that this could range from no steps, and that's okay if you haven't started your project, all the way to a completed environmental assessment. So just like you explain the current project status, make sure you explain the current environmental review status. To get more detailed information on environmental issues, you can contact your regional environmental officer. to discuss what's required for compliance. And we've got a contact list linked there. It's by state. You can pull it up and figure out who you need to contact at HUD OEE. We'll look at that list a little bit later when we get to the resource slide. Proposed subrecipients. Some grantees may wish to use subrecipients to execute their project. The distinction between grantees, subrecipients, and contractors can get a little tricky, but suffice to say that if you plan on passing down grant funds to another eligible recipient to execute the project, that's different than hiring a contractor. You need to explain how you're going to use subrecipients in the project, why you need to, and what role each subrecipient will have in the project. And explain why it's best that you use subrecipients. Explain the necessity for that move. Lastly, you're going to want to make sure that you've explained what each task and responsibility function belongs to each subrecipient and which ones you will keep as the grantee.
Okay, Chad, before we continue with the activity, we promised that we would pause and answer questions that have been raised in the chat. We have one question from Olivia, which asked, how do we apply for the BABA waiver?
So you don't need to apply. HUD has already gotten the waiver. So nothing you have to do on your part. If you don't anticipate future funds or if your project is not construction-based, infrastructure-based, you don't need to worry about BABA.
And we have one question which Connor actually answered. If Section 3 does not apply, how do we address that? And he notes that if you believe Section 3 is not applicable to your award, it is fine to make a note in your narrative or to notify your grant officer for CPF awards. Section 3 will apply. This is probably another instance where it is useful for those who are wishing to submit a grant package that is complete and has a project narrative that fits and contains all the necessary information to double check any questions that you might have related to the grant officer's guidance that will be available to you. And Chad will soon be sharing with you a link where you can identify the grant officer and other contacts, including the environmental officers. You also saw embedded links in that respect. And I'd like to also, before I share the activity, I'm going to switch screens now and go back to the presentation slides that I have here, beginning with the one related to the activity. And share my screen on a different page than what you are sharing here to
sorry about that.
A couple of points.
Let me just stop my share.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. And I will share this page now, which is your proposed subrecipients. Is that what's showing now, Chad?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And I'm going to go back and note that where that information is available, the HUD OEE environmental staff and contact information for your grant officer is at this link. And if we go back farther, you will see that the BABA Quick Guide Exchange is shown on this slide with this link. The DRGR guidance on reporting section 3 and labor hours is shown here. And then if we go all the way back to the start, I referenced where you would find the JES. It can be located at this link to the CPF webpage, which includes the laws, which would include, of course, that congressional appropriation and the regulations that relate. And I will also pause one more time to these key questions that none of you has actually asked, but we urge you to ask of yourself. Did you include the congressional award language contained in the JES? What pre-award costs, if any, are you seeking to reimburse under the grant agreement? And was your federal environmental review completed prior to starting? You will be able to obtain this set of presentation slides in answer to one person's question as soon as they can be cleared for accessibility under section 508. And that will probably mean that you'll see them on the HUD Exchange, where again, we urge you to, as this last slide I'll share with you references, be sure to visit this landing page. And as you see down here in the lower left side of the page, click on join the CPF mailing list so that you can then receive notification that there's been a posting of the slides that are soon to be made available from this very presentation. And now I'll advance the slides back to where we had left off, pausing at one place where I want to just repeat a piece of information that will guide you in the activity. I mentioned before that your project narrative needs to address these key questions, including, does your proposed description relate to language in the JES, the so-called congressional intent expressed there? Some projects may require technical corrections, and you would want to describe those technical corrections there. But if you're at the stage where you are not yet sure whether a technical correction is necessary, we urge you to discuss those issues with regard to your grant name, the project name, the description with your grant officer to determine the potential for the need of a technical correction. Okay, I'll advance past what you just went over on proposed, lastly on proposed subrecipients. And now it's time for an activity. And you might not be surprised what that activity will actually entail. To set it up, I would like to direct your attention now to this slide, which contains information that will perhaps be among the most important takeaways from this presentation. Appearing on this slide, you see a sample project description. It is a project that has a very long name, but you'll hear me refer to it as Bertram's Garden. The organization's name is the John Bertram Association, and they do business as Bertram's Garden. And this project is the Community Watershed Education and Freshwater Mussel Hatchery, a very long name, and I'll be referring to it as the Fish Hatchery Project. But you see that they have properly identified the project name, its grant number, although we have removed some of the identifying information so we don't embarrass this grantee. They have included their organization address, the lead contact's name, which is redacted, along with the lead contact's phone number, similarly redacted, and the email address that has been changed, along with the authorized representative name redacted, and the email address for that person, which is and a name, number, and address, which are also changed.
Randall, we got a request if you could maximize the screen so they can see better.
Okay, I will try to do that. Let me see. Does that make it a little bigger?
A little bit. I think that's good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Direct your attention now to the project summary, and I'll read for you what is highlighted here so that you can more clearly understand what's there in case you can't read it easily. Their project summary reads, led jointly by the John Bertram Association and the Partnership for the Blue River Estuary, this project will design and construct a new watershed education and restoration complex on previously acquired land at Bertram Gardens. I'll repeat that. Led by the grantee and their partner, their project will design and construct, that's the quoted statement from this summary, design and construct the fish hatchery, in short, on previously acquired land at Bertram's Garden. We now turn our attention to the middle of this slide, where we are no longer looking at the narrative that is taken from the project description of this grantee, but we are seeing an excerpt from the congressional record where there is a reference in the joint explanatory statement to the fish hatchery, CWEFM hatchery, and John Bertram Association, receiving in that state, unidentified, a $2 million CPF grant. This first column is supposed to identify the project's name and its purpose, specifically the activity that is for which funds are appropriated by Congress. The second column is to identify the organization's name. The organization's name is correct in that it's John Bertram Association. But does the description of the project activity match that intent of Congress and the narrative that the Bertram Association has completed to be submitted to HUD for their grant award, and an agreement then that would authorize them to spend money for land acquisition as the grantee named John Bertram Association? Does their project narrative in the left side of this slide match the JES that is in the center of this narrative, of this slide? The third column identifies what choices that grantee, the Bertram Association, might choose to make or take in that instance. They could, one, submit their project description and the grant application as described in the left side of this slide. Two, they could contact their grant officer for guidance in respect to whether the narrative description matches the JES, or they, thirdly, could request that a member of Congress intervene. Your assignment is to answer the question of what is the correct action that grantee should take. If you were representing the Bertram Association, what would you do? We're now going to launch a poll that will enable you to answer that question, and you will pick one of the three choices that relate to the grantee's action. Submit the project description with the grant application, contact the grant officer for guidance, or request that a member of Congress intervene. And we have a total number of participants that is just under 90. So we'll wait for at least maybe 2/3 of you to actually respond to this poll and participate in the activity. We're close to 50 now, and if you've not yet made your choice, go ahead and add it by selecting one of those three choices that appear in the Zoom poll. See if we can get to 60. Up to 58, 59, and 60. All right, Chad, what looks like the most popular response?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. We've got 70% of participants saying it is number 2, contact a grant officer for guidance.
Yay. Well, that is the correct answer. And now we can stop sharing these poll results and resume sharing the screen. Can you still see the screen? And I'm going to advance to the next slide, which is the correct answer. Can you see the next slide?
Yep.
Okay. The correct grantee action is in regard to this narrative was to first say, yes, the narrative is complete, but does it match the JES? And of course, the correct answer to that question is no. The recommended action is to contact the grant officer for guidance. To summarize the discussion that Chad and I have tried to facilitate in this regard, we've determined that Bertram Gardens maybe did their part. However, the narrative does not match the JES in the congressional record. Because HUD must execute grants in accordance with congressional intent, conveyed through grantees' names, project descriptions in the JES are very important. Actions necessary to correct this discrepancy. It may have been that in the intervening time between when the Bertram Gardens Association undertook this project, that their partner, the Blue River Estuary, may have contributed land and they no longer needed money to acquire land, but money to design and construct their project as expressed in the narrative. As such, the correct action, as we've emphasized here, is to contact the grant officer for guidance. This may lead to changes in the project description before it's submitted with the grant application, maybe references to the fact that the land had been acquired or donated from the partner, as I'm expressing hypothetically. But requesting a member of Congress to intervene would only complicate things. Consequently, the correct action for the grantee, Bertram Gardens, is to contact their grant officer for guidance in this matter. Okay, that finishes the activity, Chad, and I believe you need to go over the remaining slides.
Yes, I do. Just one moment. So the next slide is the resource slide. As promised, we will put these links into the chat in just a moment. But I wanted to walk you through what these different resources are and show them to you. So The first one is the grant officer assignment table.
And that's a real important one to many people, because I see that we have a question that came in after we must have started the activity, which is how can I find out who our grant officer is?
Yep, so this is the source for that information. You can get their email address. It's also the source for your regional environmental officer. You can see that column on the right, but it's as easy as figuring out, just looking across the table at what state the project is in, and you'll know who to contact.
And Chad, I wanted to offer one other piece of information.
Sure.
I earlier referenced the fact that each of these cohort grantees will be invited to office hours where you'll be able to, for example, ask for reaction to your specific project description and obtain guidance about any questions that you might have before you actually maybe address them to your grant officer. At those office hour sessions, we will have participants who are like Tracy Rowe, a grant officer, and they will be able to offer you guidance that is beyond what Chad and I might provide. Moreover, they work, or at least know the environmental officer, and I see that there is a question here about further details in regard to environmental review. That topic will be the third in the series that, as you may remember when I provided the overview, budget is next, followed by environmental review. So the people whose names are appearing on the right side of this list with their email address and regional designations, they will have a representative present in the third session for your cohort, and that will give you a chance to hear what I believe it's Leslie indicated were her interest in learning the specifications and requirements for the environmental review and issues related to the correspondence that might be exchanged in connection with completing an environmental review record. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted
no worries.
to add that bit of information.
Yep. So that was our first resource. Our second resource is the HUD CPF program website. Oh, I advanced one page off of it. It looks like this. Hopefully you've seen it by now. It is the hub for all of your information related to how to get your project up and running. You can view the grant guides. You can get access to the laws and regulations. That's where you'll find the JES itself. I did drop that link into the chat. Links for all of the different systems. Lots of resources here. We really encourage you to look around, dig in. It is a super helpful place to start your information gathering. The next one is specifically the grant guides that were referenced in the previous website. There's one for fiscal year 2022 grantees and one for fiscal year 2023 grantees. I believe everyone on this call is a 2023 grantee, but just make sure you're accessing the correct one for your grant year. They are about 50 pages of information, so I'm not going to run through the whole thing, but this is the document that will tell you how to comply with all the regulations and make sure that your project goes off without a hitch. The next resource is the HUD OEE Regional Environmental Officer contacts. We provided some information on that sheet here with contact information. This is just more. You've got phone numbers if you want to reach out to them in that manner. And Yeah, you can navigate through the regions here based on what state you are in. And the final resource I want to share is the Ask a Question. So you can see we've got CPF listed right here. You can submit a question here, and it will be answered by HUD representatives. So if you get stumped, this is a great place to turn. You can use it for really any issue that comes up as a way to draw attention to the challenges that you're having and work towards solutions. And let me go back to my presentation. There we go. The final thing on the list was the CPF desk guides, and these are still coming soon. The CPF desk guides are going to provide a little bit more detail on how to be successful with your narrative, budget, environmental, etc. And what we're doing is we are using these cohort sessions as an opportunity to gather your questions and get feedback so that we can incorporate it into the desk guides and have a useful resource for you. When those are finished, they will be on the CPF program website for you to access.
And Chad, why don't we pause here because we actually have a couple of questions related to this list of resources, the CPF grant guide, which appears as number 3, as well as the CPF help desk, more commonly referred to as the AAQ. Allie asks, I thought we should contact our grant officer if we have questions. What's the difference between contacting the grant officer versus submitting a question through the HUD exchange?
Yeah, great question. Your first stop should be your grant officer. If, for instance, you're having trouble getting a hold of your grant officer, or have something where you feel like you didn't get a satisfactory answer and you need some more guidance, you can go to that AAQ, ask a question.
Very good. And then we have a question from Christy on the FY23 grant guide. Which version should we be viewing? Number 1.0 or 2.0?
Yeah, let me go back to sharing my screen and I'll show you. So you'll notice here, it's actually for 2 different grant years. So the one that's in version 2.0 is for fiscal year 2022. And the one for 2023 is still in version 1. So if you're a 2023 grantee, you want to use this link on the bottom. And if you're a 22 grantee, you want to use the link on the top.
And presumably, Christy, in that you are participating in this cohort, which was formed from FY 2023 grantees, your particular reference would be to version 1.0 of the FY 2023 CPF grant guide. We have one more message here. Let me see what it asks. Oh, actually, Eric Yost with HUD is noting that the AAQ is good for single questions related to CPF grants, the grant guide, or clarification you may need.
Oh, I see Leslie has a question. They're seeing a conflict between the list we shared and the email that they received. Can one of our HUD representatives speak to which is the latest and greatest information to go off of?
One more time, what was the question specifically? Which
Yeah,
of the grant?
there's a mismatch between the email about their award notification saying who their program officer is and the list that we showed on the screen.
are they referring to the grant officer when they?
Sure, yeah, I could answer that. So we have added staff over time. So if you received likely an initial email with your grant officer for, a few months ago, it's because we sometimes reallocate portfolio as we've added staff. And so it could be that the original email you got for your staff assigned to the grant officer may has changed. The link on the screen to grant officers and your regional environmental officers is the most current one. And at the bottom of that screen, if you scroll down, you can see it has a date, a revised date. So it should tell you the most current version, and that's the December 21st one. And we have not changed it since that date, if that helps. But this is the most current list.
Thank you for that clarification.
Oh, Leslie says it's a typo on the email address, not a different person. My apologies.
Oh, yeah, check above. Then I think if it's wrong up here on the sheet, we can correct the sheet. And if not the name, we can give you the lookup. I'll put in the chat the lookup for HUD staff so you can find it. So if it's a specific person, it looks like it's a typo, we can get that fixed in there, or we can, I'll give you the link in the chat to contact HUD staff.
Concerns the Maryland grant officer.
Yep, Angela Dyer.
Angela Dyer, that should be correct, but let me double check and then I'll post the correct email.
All right, thank you, Eric.
Sure.
Randall, do we have any other questions that we're trying to get answers to?
Any new ones? So no.
Okay. So let's return to the slide deck. Just 1 second. There we go. So what do we have next? Q&A. So we're deep in Q&A now. Does anyone feel free to ask questions through the chat and we can get them answered. We still have a little bit more material to go through, so don't hesitate to continue asking them and we can get to them at the end of the presentation.
Right, and Eric just posted Angela Dyer's email in the chat. So
yep, so it looks like the list online has the correct email address.
Yeah,
must have been a typo in the email.
And looking back through the Q&A, I do not see any. Well, we do have one more message that just came in. Does environmental reviews apply to planning only grants? And the answer to that question is the full environmental review is not necessary in those cases. Ordinarily, what we do understand, and this will be covered in session 3, is that it will still be necessary to complete a record that makes that determination, and you will hear guidance in the 3rd session that indicates those instances where uses of certain financial assistance and completing non-impactful plans can be considered exempt. But again, the environmental review topic is one that requires a complete understanding of the detailed scope of a project and the expertise of those specialists who will participate in the session 3 on environmental review. So we urge you to tune in later, so to speak, to obtain guidance in that regard. Hope that helps, Monica. And one more, maybe this, I'll just read it. I have submitted beginning documents since May 2023, including project narrative budget, but have not received feedback on my narrative and budget. We would urge you, Dave, to contact the name of the grant officer appearing on that list, and also in the event that you are still having difficulty, you may feel free to ask either Eric or Connor for assistance. What I will share with you, and this is fairly new information that will become more available at the office hours session. The Department of HUD has recognized the fact that there are thousands of these grant awards now, and they need to surge the number of staff who are involved in the reviews, and they have created a surge team that includes 50 additional HUD officials who will add to the existing staff, which is reviewing those grant packages. So ideally, you will find that even though maybe you did not receive a response with comments recently, there will be comments forthcoming. And again, one way that you can gain reaction is to attend the office hours that Chad will be identifying momentarily.
And really quick, this is Connor. I wanted to jump in really quick. Another avenue that you have, if you're trying to get in contact with your grant officer and haven't heard from them for a while, what you can do is use the CPF AAQ that I believe Chad and Randall went over earlier in the presentation. And you can indicate that you're having trouble reaching out to your grant officer. And what that does is that those AAQs will get routed to our office, and we'll reach out directly to your grant officer on your behalf and indicate that they need to get in contact with you. So just one more avenue if you're having trouble getting in contact with your grant officer. Yes,
and Dave, that should help you. Cheryl indicated that she experienced the same issue. So Cheryl, you may want to try that approach as well. Okay, the homework assignment.
Yep, you might have thought you were out of school and homework was over, but it is not. So get ready to budget. The next session after this one, so in 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, is the budget session. So to prepare for that, we want you to finish your project narrative and make sure that you've fully described your project scope and that you reference any other funding that you are using for the project, and begin to identify uses of any funding outside of the CPF grant that might be going into the project. From there, you'll want to develop a budget that covers all of the sources of funding and all of the uses of funding. That'll get you ready for the budget session.
And as you indicated, Chad, 2 weeks will pass before that budget session. So you have an opportunity now to, pretend that you are involved in that next step in completing the project narrative. You want to work on the budget and have a grant package completed as early as possible to submit and enter into the grant agreement. You will want to follow our request that you do this homework in order to actively participate in that session. And I will foreshadow what will occur. Chad's asked you to begin thinking about how the narrative and its scope covers the entirety of the project and identifies not only the sources and uses of those funds that you are being awarded from HUD, particularly the CPF grant, but the other sources as well. In the budget session that will occur as shown here, the presenters will be going over details, and they will actually include in their homework assignment instructions for you to start work on completing that budget itself, the spreadsheet that would be offered as your budget. And here again, you'll have the chance to participate in office hours sessions with those presenters who can react to your budget and indicate if it fits what appears to be the expectations of the grant officer and those at HUD who will review your grant package.
All right. So here we've got the information for the budget session. It is the second session of 4. We've also got the environmental one after that, and forms as the final one. We thought we would provide our contact information, Randall and mine. If you have any questions about the presentation that come up afterwards that you didn't think of to ask, you can shoot us an email and we can get back to you. The last thing here is that HUD asks participants from these types of courses to give feedback and complete an evaluation. You all will receive an email from cohorts@tdainc.org with a link to complete an evaluation, or if you want to get a jump start on it now, you can scan the QR code on the screen. We really value your feedback. We want to make these sessions as helpful as possible. So please fill out the evaluation, and we really take that information to heart. And lastly, thank you for attending. We appreciate it, and we can stick around for just a few more minutes to look at answers or questions that have been asked in the chat. Let's see what we have here.
There's a question about the next meeting, and yes, you will receive a notification from TDA and within the learning management system, Absorb, which provides you with the link to Cohort 4, Session 2 on the budget, and that same pattern will follow through for environmental review and for forms. And as Chad mentioned, the sessions are paced 2 weeks apart, so you can work on what will be repeated homework assignments that actually are designed to enable you to make progress, receive responses to questions that you'll pose in the so-called office hours that follow as well, and also hear the reaction to certain issues by a grant officer like your grant officer, who would have a perspective of what HUD is expecting in each particular case. As Chad referenced in the question about environmental review, a lot of the detailed answers and the specific instructions you would receive from your grant officer or after review of your grant materials, it all depends. It depends on the specific circumstances surrounding your particular grant project.
Let's see. It looks like we've gotten a bunch of questions about can we email the presentation? Can we provide it in advance next time? We would have loved to provide it in advance. Unfortunately, the information on the slides has been changing a bunch lately as the program evolves. We just weren't able to get it out in advance. It will be posted to the HUD Exchange afterwards.
That's correct. And the staff at TDA Consulting has begun a practice of trying to pre-clear for accessibility under Section 508. The release of these slides, that's the step that prevents us from being able to give them to you today. We'd like to just place them in the chat, and what we're promising to do, the slides that and the transcript that will follow are going to be reviewed in the next day, and then with HUD's permission, they will be posted to the HUD Exchange thereafter. So we're going to try to turn around it as fast as humanly possible within the limits of what Chad noted. There are, of course, you just saw it, dates are changing, and this is not the only cohort. There are several, and the dates and the guidance as indicated earlier. The presence of the additional HUD staff and the so-called surge team, all of those kinds of things are an evolving response to enable you as grantees to be able to successfully complete your grant package and receive the funding, begin implementing your project for the community as soon as possible. So we thank you very much for your participation and look for a notification soon, especially if you've already joined the CPF mailing list, and will then be able to access the information, including the slides and transcript from today's presentation. So we thank you very much for your active participation, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.